Hello, my name's Dave, and I've been seeing a lot of misconceptions and things that people get wrong on legal standpoints online and seem to very strongly believe things that just aren't true. And I figured I would make a few videos to explain some things and hopefully clear up some of those misconceptions so people don't get themselves into trouble. And so that's what I like to do. This one, I'm going to mainly focus on uses of force and self-defense. And that's going to be my minute. Now, I need to preface, I'm not a lawyer. This is not meant to be legal advice. This is for educational purposes only. I do have a degree in criminal justice, some experience with law enforcement. I'm prior military, lots of use of force type training and such outside of those as well. So again, this is for educational purposes only. Now, the first thing I should probably mention is that definitions, when you're talking on a legal standpoint, definitions matter. And a problem that a lot of people get into is that the definitions that they stick to are their definitions or maybe normal society definitions. Those don't matter. Legal definitions. If you're talking about legal things, it is the legal definitions that matter. Now, if you open up any state statute book, at the beginning of every chapter is going to be a list of terms that are common in that chapter and the definitions for those terms. It is those definitions that matter. And those a lot of times are further clarified in the courts where they add extra meaning to these terms. But again, the way that things are defined under the law are very often different than how you might define them personally. But when it comes to legal things, it is only the legal definitions that matter, not yours. One good example is reasonable or reasonableness. This comes up a lot in the law. The way the law defines and looks at these things may be very different than how you do. But if you're looking at legal matters, you have to just throw away your own personal beliefs on these definitions and only look at the legal definitions. When we talk about reasonableness and reasonableness standards and things that are reasonable, what that generally means, and I'm going to paraphrase this greatly, what that generally means is what a reasonable person would believe under the circumstances as they are known at the time. That is what's considered reasonable. And so that's what you need to look at. When we're talking about uses of force, there are different levels of force. Shoving someone back is a different level of force than punching them in the face, which is a different level of force than swinging a baseball bat at their head. Those are all different levels of force. Now, for the purpose of this, I'm going to mainly talk about the difference between lethal force and non-lethal force, even knowing that non-lethal force still has a huge spectrum of differences. But I'm going to put that together and mainly talk about the difference between those two. Now, what determines, and here's where it gets important, what determines the difference between levels of force is what would the worst reasonably plausible outcome of that use of force. The worst reasonably plausible, not possible, but plausible outcome of that use of force. I'd like to give you an example. So I'm walking down the street or on a sidewalk next to a high-rise building, and a person walks straight up to me and starts slapping me in the face. Okay, so I shove them back. Okay, now we're along the line of sight. I just shove them back. What is reasonably plausible outcome of that shove? Reasonable plausible that they stumble back a little bit, a couple steps, stay on their feet. It's reasonable plausible that they could stumble back and fall down and land on their butt or something. Those are reasonably plausible outcomes. Under those, that's not lethal force because none of those involve them being unalived. Okay? So now remember, I said it's reasonably plausible outcomes. Ultimate outcome plays no role in defining what level of force it is. So let's say I shove them back a couple feet, and at that exact moment, a flower pot falls off a fifth store balcony. And it just so happens I shove them back into the exact spot that falls, it cracks them on the head, and they are unalived. The fact that my shove led to them being unalived does not retroactively make it lethal force, because that's not a reasonably plausible. If I'm telling the story to a reasonable person, a random reasonable person, and I say, yeah, I shoved the guy back, he stumbled back 2 feet, and then a flower pot hit him on the head and he is no more, they're going to be shocked by that outcome. They're like, whoa. They're going to be shocked by that outcome. That means that was not plausible. Is it possible? Yeah, sure, it's possible. It could happen. Was it reasonably plausible? No. Nobody's going to expect that to happen. And that's what matters. What is expected to be at. Now, let's change it up a little bit. I'm walking down the street. Someone is walking. And as they pass me, I'm on the building side. They're on the street side. It is a busy street. They slap me and I shove them into traffic. Now, is it reasonably plausible that when I shove them into traffic, they get hit by a car and are unalived? Yes. If I'm telling the story to just some random reasonable person, and like, yeah, I shoved them into traffic and then they got hit by a car and they are no more, that person will be like, yeah, that makes sense that would happen. That tracks. Yeah, it's not going to be a big surprise. So there, in that case, that shove would have been lethal force. Now, let's say I shoved them into traffic. Luckily, at that exact moment, no cars were passing by at that exact moment. Like, they scrambled back onto the sidewalk right as a car passed by, and they're fine. They were not hurt at all. There's no damage done. That does not retroactively make it go back and no longer be lethal force. The fact is, it's reasonably plausible. They could have died. They could have been unalived. And that is what determines whether or not it was lethal force. Not the fact whether they were unalived or fine after the fact. It does not matter. Now, when we're talking about self-defense, self-defense is what's known as an affirmative defense. And what an affirmative defense means if you're claiming an affirmative defense, that means you're saying, yes, what I did was normally be considered illegal, would normally be considered a crime. However, due to these circumstances, it was permissible. That's what that's what an affirmative defense is. It means, yes, I did the thing that would be illegal. However, because of these other circumstances, it's not illegal. Self-defense kicks in when, and this is what matters, somebody else's illegal actions are putting you at risk, at some form of risk. Now, the level of self-defense the level of force you use is determined by the level of risk they're placing you in. And so it basically goes to their use of force. Their illegal use of force does dictate the level of force you can use. So going back to the man on the street. Man on the street walks up and slaps me and starts just slapping me, open hand, slapping me. That is illegal. They can't do that. They're not allowed to do that, but he's doing it anyway. Now I have a right to defend myself from being slapped by this person. I have an affirmative defense to some form of force to stop them from doing that. However, since they're not subjecting me to lethal force themselves, meaning something that could end my living, since they're not subjecting that, I am not authorized to do lethal force back. Self-defense does not mean you can do any amount of force you want. If they are slapping me, I cannot pull out a pew-pew and shoot them for it. That's not allowed. Okay? It has to be commensurate. Now, when it comes to use of force, things that don't matter, that people get wrong, ultimate outcome does not matter as far as determining what level of force it was. And intent actually does not matter either. So the fact that what they intended was not to end one's living, that doesn't matter. Was it reasonably plausible that that force they were using could do that? That's what matters. That's all that matters as far as how you respond in self-defense. So, and here's some examples. Some things are considered always lethal force, regardless of your intent. A good example is discharging a firearm. You're using your pew-pew, okay? That is always considered lethal force. The whole idea of shooting to disable, of shooting an arm or a leg, that's Hollywood. That's not reality. Okay? If you are discharging that firearm, that is a use of lethal force. Why? And let's give an example. You're sitting somewhere you're out there sitting at a picnic table with your wife. Someone runs up as they're passing by, they grab her purse and are running away. You're armed, but you're not fast enough to catch it. So you carefully, maybe you're a great shot, and you pull out your pew-pew and you aim low and you try to go ahead and just hit them in the leg to stop them from fleeing with that purse. You have no intention of ending their life. You just want to disable and stop them from running. You're just trying to wound. Can you do that? No, you cannot. Because is it reasonably plausible that when you discharge that firearm in their direction, that you hit something, maybe you actually hit the leg, but it hits an artery and they bleed out? That's reasonably plausible to happen when you discharge that. So therefore, since the worst thing that is reasonably plausible is them being unalived, that is lethal force. The laws basically, and the courts have said, any discharge of a firearm towards a person is considered lethal force. Another thing that sometimes is written straight into the law, but is basically understood, is if you accelerate your vehicle forward while knowing that someone is standing in front of your vehicle, that is lethal force. You might not intend to end their life. You might be intending merely to leave. But knowing the person's there, see what is reasonably plausible to happen. They might jump out of the way and avoid being hit entirely. That's plausible. They might get hit, but kind of stumble, as they're getting out of the way. They might get hit more of a glancing blow and just kind of stumble away. They might get hit, fall down, but they fall beside the vehicle instead of straight back, and they're mostly fine, maybe minor injuries. They might get hit, fall, and have an arm and a leg still in the path of the tires, and those get rolled over, and so they get a fairly serious but non-life-threatening injury. That's reasonably plausible. It's also reasonably plausible that when they get hit, maybe by what should be a glancing blow, they fall straight back, their body still in line with the tires, and the vehicle rolls over them and ends their life. That is also a reasonably plausible outcome to accelerating your car directly towards a person. Therefore, since one of those reasonably plausible outcomes results in them being unalived, that's lethal force. Okay? And it's illegal lethal force. You're not allowed to do that. You can't do that. So, if someone is using that form of illegal lethal force against you, an affirmative defense kicks into where you are allowed to do so. Normally, you're not allowed to pew-pew at people, but if they're using lethal force against you unlawfully, you get to use lethal force to defend yourself from that. That is how self-defense works. All right, lethal force is allowed when there is a serious risk, imminent risk of serious injury or, I hate these rules, but unaliving. Okay, that is when self-defense with lethal force is authorized. So I hope that clears up some of the confusion we've been seeing about different things, and you can look into it. You tell me I'm wrong in the comments, whatever, that's fine. We can have a debate about it. But talking from a legal stand. Now, I'm not making moral judgments. I'm not saying if this is right or wrong. I am merely trying to lay out a legal framework to view things by. Okay? And again, it goes by what is known at the time to determine whether or not a response with lethal force is authorized. A vehicle suddenly accelerating straight towards you, it might be for the courts to ultimately adjudicate, but that appears in those cases to authorize lethal force to stop, them from unaliving you, even if that's not what they intended to do. Again, when it comes to self-defense, the intent does not matter, nor does the ultimate outcome. A lot of people are arguing both those things in the most recent case. I think we all know what I'm talking about. But when it comes to a legal standpoint, those things just don't matter. Now, would it matter in a civil case for damages? Sure. But I'm talking on the criminal side of the house. It might matter in the civil case, but in the criminal side, when it comes to self-defense, the intent actually doesn't matter, nor does the ultimate outcome. All that matters is what is reasonably, plausibly possible. That's it. So I hope that helps, and I will follow up with other somewhat related videos as well. Thank you.